Hello, all, and welcome. We are back and continuing our series, Coaching for Transformation. Once again, we are joined by Susan Minaya, COO and Chief Learning Strategist of Minaya Learning Global Solutions, whom is also an executive coach. Today, we're continuing our leadership series with a topic that often gets misunderstood, being an inclusive leader. Stay tuned to learn more. Susan, welcome back.
Thank you, Dario. It's good to be back.
Yeah. So diving in, when leaders hear that phrase, right, inclusive leader, many immediately think DEI programs, HR initiatives, but that's not really where you start, right?
No, not at all. From my perspective, inclusive leadership isn't a program, Dario. It's really a leadership capability. And it shows up most clearly in everyday moments, not big grand ideas, like how leaders communicate, how they make decisions, and how they respond when things get uncomfortable.
So, how do you define inclusive leadership at its core?
Well, when I think about inclusive leadership, I think about it as a discipline. It's the discipline of creating conditions where different perspectives actually surface. They get considered and they actually influence decisions, especially when the pressure's on. And that matters because inclusion doesn't live in mission statements, Dario. It lives in how leaders use their authority every day.
Mhm.
It's what they invite, what they're reinforcing, and what they sometimes unintentionally shut down.
So, why do you think inclusive leadership gets misunderstood so often?
I think it's because over time it's been softened. It gets
Mm.
translated into being agreeable or avoiding tension
Mm.
or assuming that if no one's pushing back, everything must be fine. you know? But what I see in organizations is almost the opposite. Leaders unintentionally create exclusion, not through big decisions, but through patterns. Who gets to speak without interruption? Who gets challenged? Who has to wait, and who eventually decides it's safer to stay quiet. That's why this idea matters so much, because silence doesn't mean alignment. More often, it means people have learned when it's not worth speaking up.
Well, that puts a lot of weight on everyday leadership behavior, no?
It actually does, and especially on communication. Inclusive leadership shows up most clearly, Dario, in how leaders communicate in moments that feel ordinary. The questions leaders ask signals what matters. The language they use shapes credibility. And the way ideas are structured determines whether people can actually process what's being said or feel comfortable chiming in on the topic. Clarity isn't just a communication skill, it's an inclusion behavior. When
Mm.
leaders are clear, people don't have to guess where they stand or whether their contribution matters.
Well, this is really sounding like it connects directly into psychological safety.
Exactly. Psychological safety isn't something leaders announce. I look at it as a lagging indicator of leadership behavior.
Mm.
Teams aren't asking, is it safe here? They're asking, what happens when I speak up, right?
Mm.
And when leaders respond with curiosity instead of defensiveness, when dissent is handled with respect rather than dismissal, trust is going to build in those circumstances. And when trust builds, better thinking shows up in the group.
So, are there patterns you hear from leaders that signal trouble?
There are a few phrases I hear over and over, and none of them come from a bad place. We have to understand that. Leaders will say things like, I treat everyone the same, or no one's raised an issue, or that's just their personality. We think about that. We have to be careful because each sounds reasonable on the surface, but underneath, they often mask something very important. Treating everyone the same ignores context. Silence usually reflects risk and not feeling comfortable. And labeling behavior as personality can be a way of stepping around responsibility. So, inclusive behavior starts when leaders get curious about those moments instead of explaining them away.
This really feels like the kind of thing leaders can't always see on their own.
They usually can't. And that's where coaching becomes so powerful. Coaching creates space for leaders to notice these patterns that they've normalized, how they react under stress, and where they default to control instead of curiosity, or how their values show up or disappear, especially on those busy days when they're under a lot of pressure. So that's how inclusion becomes real, not because leaders intend it, but because they're willing to reflect, adjust, and practice in real time.
Okay. Well, if you could leave our listeners, our leaders, right, with one thing to take away from this, what would that be?
I would say if I left them with one thing, it's this: pay attention to your everyday moments, meetings, decisions, reactions. What happens after someone speaks up? That's where inclusion actually lives, not in what leaders intend, but in what people experience, right, over time. And inclusive leadership isn't about saying the right things. It's about creating conditions where people feel psychologically safe enough to offer their best thinking, even when that thinking is uncomfortable or may challenge the status quo. When leaders get that right, inclusion stops being an initiative and starts becoming how work really gets done.
Wow. Well, Susan, that reframing is very powerful. Inclusion as leadership discipline, not ideology.
Yeah, that's it exactly. It is a discipline. It takes attention. So when leaders understand inclusion as a leadership and a strategic capability, everything changes.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights on inclusive leadership,
Of,
Susan.
of course, Dario. Thank you.
Of course. And for everyone listening in, stay tuned for our next episode where we dive into being an organizational leader. Until next time.